I'm Rachel, and this is my Am reading video for Friday, February 7th, 2020. I meant to sit down in front of this camera a bit earlier in the week. This was not perhaps my best planning week. I have been watching a lot of BookTube, though, in part to convince myself that in other parts of the country and the world there is snow on the ground. Although I guess I can't really complain. I wouldn't necessarily mind snow, although, it's been unseasonably warm here too, for the most part in the DC area. And I'm thrilled that there's no ice. I've also, of course, been watching for the BookTube content. I just love all sorts of videos of wrap-ups and check-ins and hauls and that sort of thing. And I've been chatting with Hannah at Hannah's Books about The Bluest Eye. She gave a really thoughtful commentary on Toni Morrison's debut novel. I'll link that below. And speaking of which, I guess this is a good segue into the book I read this week. This is Sula, Toni Morrison's second novel. Just a quick side note, all of my January reading is of course wrapped up, and rather than ramble on about it here, I'll just link down to my literary newsletter down below. It's a monthly thing I do on my reading and my writing blog, where I include snippets from my Goodreads reviews of the books I read, and I include bookish news that caught my fancy, and I have a book meme and a book pick and stuff like that, so check it out down below. Anyway, back to Sula. Sula is actually a reread for me. I read this during college for a course, and for years I've been haunted by the fact that most of what I remember is cramming for a paper, and that I didn't really remember all that much that was significant from the book, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to rectify that situation at last. This book, I think, is more approachable than The Bluest Eye. It's more conventional in the telling. Like Morrison just, parses things out by year rather than by season. And I think all of the characters are more intricately connected to one another and to an ongoing plot. Whereas in The Bluest Eye, I think it was a little more random, I suppose, and thematic, but not plot-driven. Which is weird for me to harp on, me and my anti-plot feelings. And a lot of this novel is still very lyrical and just, living inside people's heads. But anyway, our titular character, Sula, is... I'm not sure exactly how to describe Sula. She is someone of her own mind, it seems. She seems to be too big for life in a way. She lives in a rural Ohio town called Bottom, or that's the area up in the hills where the black folk live, because the white folk wanted the valley, which, at the time of the founding, was the more fertile and nice land. And so anyway, she's in this, community of black people in Bottom, and we also get to see her grandmother and mother's history and how their backstories and their choices as women helped define her. Like her grandmother Eva is this very proud, independent woman who, when the chips were down, actually disappeared for a while, left her kids with a neighbor, and when she came back with the means to support them mysteriously, she was also mysteriously missing a leg. And then she sort of built an empire, or not an empire, but a house on a hill, and kind of ruled a lot of the town, it seems that way, or was a prominent figure. And then Sula's mother, Hannah, was a young widow, and sort of just very beautiful and kind and promiscuous, including with married men. But the way she went about it apparently didn't cause any rancor, unlike when Sula went about the same thing, because I think she had too much of Eva's pride along with the promiscuity, I guess. But Sula is somebody who also just sort of, I think, wants to live life on her own terms. And in the second half of the novel, that certainly becomes a problem, including with her best girlfriend, Nell, who we see the two of them grow up together and how they were thick as thieves. And I think Sula was prescribing to sort of a intensity of loyalty and identification with Nell that Nell didn't ultimately feel. because she went the more traditional path of getting married, and then Sula disappeared for 10 years, so there's that, and Nell was married with children and making, relationships that way. We also see a little bit of Nell's history that her mother was Creole, and her grandmother was also rather promiscuous, and so there's sort of a she grew up more with a sense of shame about that her mother was ashamed of her grandmother. I mean, once again, it's just a beautifully written story where I got lost in a lot of the language and the descriptions of people and situations and relationships and dialogue and that sort of thing. There was a lot of magical realism in this. I mean, it felt kind of gothic, kind of, like Faulkner, that sort of thing. Like, Eva was a guardian to three boys who she called the Deweys, and they became indistinguishable from one another, including to their own mothers. Or when Sula came home, she disappeared after Nell's wedding, and when she came home 10 years later, she was heralded by a flock of birds. And it was just sort of rich atmospheric stuff that, I think you can take it in stride as Morrison sort of weaving. I guess it makes it feel more like a folk tale, really, and it's just reminding me that this is one of the rare instances, certainly when the book was published, of black people, and especially black women, sort of getting a center stage. So I think it all sort of just augments their reality, and perhaps even the perplexity of having to deal with a lot of systematic racism. We have other things going on. And we have the character Shadrach, who sort of opens and closes the story more or less. He's a World War I veteran who's been traumatized, and he starts an annual day called Suicide Day, where he kind of goes banging and singing through the streets, and I guess that would be something, well, a lot of things in this would be curious to talk about with the Toni Morrison Voxer group. I assume I should tell them, I guess, that I finished this, and I can see when everyone else will be ready to talk about this. But I kind of see Suicide Day as actually a celebration of life and of sort of holding on, and Shadrach is a character who very much sort of lost hold of life after the trauma of the war. And he's a bit of a hermit and a loner, and I feel like, once again, in a folklore sort of capacity, he has a thorough way to truth that maybe some other people don't have. He certainly pops up in meaningful ways in some of the subplots. There's also, speaking of socioeconomics, the idea of building up infrastructure and the economy in the area. They wanted to build a bridge out from the town into other towns, and then it turned into a tunnel. And this was supposed to be exciting for Bottom and the black community because they were supposed to help with construction, but it turns out that for the most part white folks were using immigrants and that sort of thing. And so that speaks to larger sort of societal issues going on in America in the mid-century about how immigrants versus black people were or were not getting opportunities to work. And so that just sort of feeds into the atmosphere of the town that, there's just sort of this poverty and this lack of advancement because of the racial situations in America. And so if you scratch at this, so much more is coming out even than I talk about in my Goodreads review. I think I focused a bit more there on Sula and Nell and that relationship, which was also, of course, very powerful. But yeah, I feel certainly rectified. I feel like I got a lot more out of this book now that I don't have to worry about cramming for papers or getting distracted by other parts of collegiate life. And I'm looking forward to talking about it in more detail with other booktubers. The next thing on my docket is a memoir. This is Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls by T. Kara Madden. This is about interracial issues and class divides within a family, and particularly for this author. It's another book, I suppose, about personal identity within the context of broader realities of socioeconomics in America. But anyway, I am reading this as a judge for the BookTube Prize, so I won't be saying anything more about this book until late March or early April when the octafinals are announced. I'll link to BookTube Prize information down below. So that about covers it for me now, coming into, well, technically the second weekend of February, because the first weekend was the first 2 days of the month. It's my mother's birthday on Monday, so I'm going home for part of this weekend, and my gift for her just came in the mail, holding up more books here. This is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, which I myself hope to be reading next month because of the upcoming Hulu adaptation. I have Ng's first novel on my own shelves. It's been there from a used bookstore for a long while now, so I'm excited to get to this. But I bought this for my mother, not for myself. I bought it for my mother actually because she is in the process of retiring and she wants to start a book club, and she and some lady friends, I suppose, have decided that they want to meet up and just pitch ideas to one another about what they want to read. So my mom asked me basically for ideas of what to pitch, and I thought, well, this one has been hugely popular in the book club world. I remember one of my own book club meetings where we were talking about another book, but for a long period beforehand there was this one member who was gushing about this book. And of course, you know, Reese Witherspoon chose it for her book club, and now it's going to be her miniseries. So I'm hoping this is a contender and that my mom and I will like it. And then just to add in a used book, or a book that I'm unhauling for her, this is Modern Lovers by Emma Straub, which I personally read a couple of months ago, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty good, and so I figured I would do my usual for books like this and hand it off to my mom, who will then hand it off to my sister, I assume. And I think this will be a pretty easy read for her and pretty fun. At least that's what I'm hoping. And that is more than enough outroing in and of itself, so I guess I will be wrapping up here. Hope you all have great weekends planned ahead. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.